Well, welcome. I'm Michael Schreiber. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at RFK Human Rights, and I want to thank you for joining us for the ongoing book club speaker series. We have a great conversation lined up for you today. We curate these sessions with an eye to aligning the issues and context relative to the work that we at RFK Human Rights do. Despite today being our first foray into fiction, it's no different. Our work in ethical AI started in earnest this year and will continue to see prioritization in 2026. Given the topics covered, breakthrough innovation and novel technology, more so than mysterious deaths and unexplained anomalies, we are privileged to welcome RFK board member Soraya Darabi to the call. Soraya is a founder and general partner of TMV, where she invests in next generation impact startups with a focus on tech enabled organizations across the care economy, the future of work, and climate solutions. Soraya began her career at the New York Times as the first managing manager of digital partnerships and social media. She went on to co-found the mobile app Food Spotting, which was named by both Apple and Wired Magazine an App of the Year, later acquired by OpenTable and then followed by Priceline. Soraya has been featured on the covers of first Fast Company magazine and Brand Week for her work as an entrepreneur, and later became a featured guest on ABC News programs and a host of Business Schooled, a leading business podcast. Please join me in welcoming Soraya Darabi. Soraya?
Thank you, Michael. And thank you so very much to RFK Human Rights for hosting the webinar today, and to our esteemed speaker and guest, Stacey Abrams. Of course, she needs absolutely no introduction to this audience, but I will recap just a few of the many ways in which we've known to admire and respect Stacey Abrams. She, of course, is known for her work as a politician, a former House Minority Leader for the Georgia General Assembly and State Representative for the 89th House District. In today's context, best-selling author and extraordinarily accomplished multiple author of the books that we're describing today, the Avery Keene series. We're joined by Stacey to discuss specifically Coded Justice, the newest installment of the series, which comes out every 2 years. And we're going to be speaking to you today about the latest development of the Avery character in her work to uncover an incredible and an extensive mystery involving ethical AI and healthcare AI, and specifically. So I'm so thrilled to welcome Stacey Abrams to the webinar today. Thank you for joining us at RFK Human Rights. We're absolutely thrilled to have you.
It's all right. It is a joy to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
So I'd love to kick this off today with a question on everyone's mind. Everyone here is familiar with the book, the RFK Book Club of the Month, and so many of the attendees have read the book. And in particular, the series starts with a question that is about the world in which we're living today and the implications of AI, specifically within healthcare. I'm curious, what drew you to this issue now in particular?
I love writing stories about complicated policy issues that people don't feel trained enough to access, or where it just feels like, I'll get to it later when I have time to sit down with a tome and 3 podcasts. So I like to begin my books with a question: what do I want to know? What's interesting to me? What feels remote? And then you layer on top of that, I have a niece who lived with me during her last 2 years of high school. And having a 16-year-old who knows more than I do about something is always just very, very jarring. And so I wanted to make certain I better understood AI. When those two pieces came together, it was at a time I was thinking a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and what its implications were across a range of issues, because we were watching DEI face such aggressive assault in 2023 and 24. And so I wanted to talk about AI and DEI, but I needed a point of entry that felt familiar, that felt high stakes enough,
Right.
but that also unpacked another set of issues. And that for me is healthcare, and particularly the healthcare that we do or do not provide to our veterans. And so for me, that gave me an opportunity to use a population, veterans, who are amongst our most diverse, to use the conversation of health equity as a way to enter the conversation, and then to think about how do we understand AI as both a help and a harm, and really how do we understand it as a tool so that we feel comfortable enough demanding more. And so that became Coded Justice.
Well, there's absolutely no part of the book where it sounds like AI is anything new to you. In fact, something that I took away that I found to be quite remarkable is how you broke down very technical ideas like hallucinations and made it accessible to the reader. What was that journey like in, thinking through some of the tech jargon in particular for an audience that's here for the thrill of following Avery along?
So I've tried to do this in all of my thrillers. In fact, I did this in my romance novels too. I like taking heady conversations and complex topics and bringing them into real space. I mean, part of my job when I was active in politics and always as a policy person, it's been the translations matrix. How do you make certain people care about what you're talking about? And if you want them to care, they have to understand. So for this book, I spent a lot of time studying AI. So my sort of the backdrop for my study, uh, The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman, Unmasking AI by Joy Bulamwini, and then The AI Revolution in Healthcare by Peter Lee, as well as The Four Battlegrounds. I then listened to gazillion podcasts to really understand not just how people talk about it, but how people understood what they were hearing.
Right.
And then I did a short course that was made available by MIT, and you didn't have to, you just could sort of learn what you needed to know. And I did a lot of research. So I did deep dives into all of those topics. And if you'd walked into my office where I write my books, it looked like being in the middle of a beautiful mind with all the little images and diagrams. But for me to be able to translate it, as I said, I needed to know what I was talking about enough that my metric is I need to sound like an expert to the novice and respectful to the experts. So,
Well, no, you sounded perfect. As a healthcare AI investor, you sounded absolutely
well,
perfect.
thank you. That is a high compliment.
And I'm looking at a couple of those books, like The Coming Book on my bookshelf. I'm in my office right now as we speak. And in my rabbit hole of research for this interview, I read that your sister might have influenced part of the book. Is that true or
So I have three sisters,
okay?
and so each of them actually played a role. My oldest sister, Andrea, who is an anthropologist by training, ran a DEI program at a university and now runs a DEI organization. She was, I think, the most high impact for me because she really challenged me to go beyond the story and into the meaning. And I tried to do that anyway, but when you're dealing with a professor who also happens to be your big sister, it's hard to say no. But there was a moment in the book where I thought I'd done my job, and she came back and she said, "Here are the questions I have. Have they answered these questions?" And it was so important to me that I went back and I added another layer to the book, and it actually yielded new characters who hadn't been in the first iteration. And it also led to one of my favorite scenes, which is this debate among the core four characters,
Rubies.
really, really having them to, our Scooby Gang, when they had to really duke it out. That for me was an incredibly important way to answer the questions that Andrea asked. And the answer was, I don't know, but at least we talked about it.
Okay. Well, my sister is watching this webinar, a huge fan of yours. And so it's
Thank
a
you.
very familiar arc for me. She's my healthcare expert. Dr. Diaz asks whether data or HAL has been built. What are your hopes and fears when it comes to the usage of AI in healthcare? I mean, is it the antagonist in your book or really just something you'd want people to be more aware of wholeheartedly?
And I think you'll appreciate this, Soraya. I see it as a tool, and too often we ascribe anthropomorphic beliefs. So
Mhm.
we treat it as though AI is doing something. AI is a tool.
Right.
The decision makers are the ones who decide whether it is going to be a salvation or a condemnation. And part of what I was trying to explore with the way I structured the book was that no one was really a bad person. Even when we unveil the culprit, the intentions may have some, twisted edge to them, but you don't start out that way. AI doesn't start out as good or bad. AI starts out as a neutral technology that has expansive capacity to be transformational in our lives. And what Dr. Diaz has to figure out is how much is he willing to risk humanity for the benefits that he wants to achieve, but also how much money is he willing to give up? So each of the characters really had to grapple with the very human conversation of what can we do? How much does it cost? And how much risk or harm are we willing to live with? And I think that's really the conversation about AI in healthcare. It is a transformational tool. Just writing and creating Milo, creating the clinic. I spent days just really thinking about what could this mean. And I talked to friends who were in the healthcare space and also people who had done this work for big tech companies. And what they could describe was fantastical. And as someone who loves Star Trek, it was amazing. It was like I was in sick bay. But it also means that there are things we have to give up or give into in order to achieve it. And that I think is the real tension, not what the capacity is, but what are we willing to risk or concede for that capacity to be realized.
Now we have to ask which Star Trek?
Okay, so a I started with Next Generation. I respect, revere, and idolize Next Generation, but my favorite Trek is actually Voyager.
Ah, interesting. I've only seen Next Gen. So.
You'd love Voyager, but that's a book club for a different day.
Remind me, in the book, the AI is referred to as one part Da Vinci and one part. It's like, come on,
Oh,
great analogy. The reason I'm going this direction is because I'm curious if you were to walk into a Barnes and Noble or maybe better a Parnassus book and see Coded Justice on the sci-fi bookshelf, would you want it removed, or do you actually feel like, without giving any spoilers away to what actually happens, in the near end of the journey with AI in particular not being the antagonist, uh, do you feel like this could be our future in the near term?
yeah. So I wouldn't remove it. I would just make sure they had it in fiction.
Okay.
Because here's the thing. I write things that are improbable but not impossible. That's what makes it a thriller. Every technology I describe in this book exists right now. It doesn't necessarily do the things I say in the context that I create, but there is not a piece of technology that I describe that does not have the capacity to do exactly what I lay out at this moment. And that's why putting it in science fiction, I think, gives people a bit too much comfort because science fiction presumes we're not there yet. We are there. The question is, what are we going to do with where we are? And what are the harms? And you mentioned it earlier. When I started understanding hallucinations and when I started reading about generative AI and its ability to reason versus know, all of those questions that we don't necessarily grapple with right now, we're the test models. They're
Right.
testing these things out on us at this moment. And so we've got to understand that we are creating, co-creating a lot of what AI will be right this moment. And I may take it to some extremes, but none of these extremes, all of these extremes could be met with the current technology we have before us.
Well, I'm really glad you said that because even though it is extreme, one of the key themes that I took away from the book was around accountability. And so, in your opinion, where does the accountability lie?
I think the accountability begins with the engineers and with the corporations that are promulgating this. We know that AI is largely coming from a handful of companies: Anthropic, Google, uh, XAI, Meta, and OpenAI. And so, if we know who's doing it, then our responsibility is to demand information and, to your point, accountability in how it's being developed. There was the moment when Grok became, a Nazi. And I remember reading the story where, Grok apologized. Grok doesn't exist. Grok is a technology. The engineers, the coders, the owners, the people who said this is how we're going to train this model, they are the ones who should be held accountable. And part of the worry I have with this anthropomorphization of this technology, I have not slept a lot today. The challenge there is that we then remove obligation and responsibility from the humans making this happen. And we saw that play out a little bit when we learned about Meta's decision making about its ethics when it comes to young people. And we are grappling with that with OpenAI and what it's permitting or encouraging. the technology is doing nothing other than what the humans say it can or should do. And so, as both consumers, but also as co-citizens, we are obligated to raise our voices and ask, what decisions are you making? How are you training these models? And the last piece I'll add to it is, and you might ask me about it later, we are watching government intervene right now in ways that are deeply harmful to the long-term implications. And I really want us to understand that this isn't something happening in 20 or 30 years. This is something happening on Thursday.
Right. Intervening, but not intervening in the ways that maybe this audience might want, like making the builders less heterogeneous, as an example.
Exactly.
Okay. I'd love to talk a little bit about you personally and something that you've said before many a times in interviews, which is that you believe that storytelling is a tool for civic engagement. Can you unpack that a little bit for us? And how do you hope that this novel, Coded Justice in particular, is going to help shape the discourse around AI?
So I'll give you an example of something that recently occurred. And this was what I was referencing a second ago. The president issued an executive order that essentially said you can no longer train AI models using DEI, which on its face made some people happy, some people reflexively happy, some people reflexively angry. But knowing what that means meant that if you have a family member who has a disease and the traditional model of research looks at how white men respond,
Mhm.
if you are a woman, a person of color, there are necessarily going to be divergent research that has to be accomplished in order to train that model to understand what's happening with you. My father had prostate cancer 3 times. The second time it went undiagnosed because Black men do not have the same PSA levels as white men. But based on the training that doctor had received, he did not know to look for it. And it took my mother flagging this because she had done additional research. Now imagine that you're an AI model that is a healthcare AI model. That healthcare AI model may not be trained to do that deeper research because that has been cordoned off as DEI research because it implicates something other than a neutral white man as the standard. Here's why it matters. Recently, in fact, over Labor Day, the same White House announced that they were now doing a pilot program with Medicare, where Medicare decisions will be made in part through AI modeling. And if that AI modeling does not consider DEI, then the decisions made by this AI model and recommended to the doctors and to the insurance companies on whether treatment will be approved or not approved could create harm. And here's why this matters in real time. There are 9 states participating in this, and the companies that provide the AI technology get paid for basically for any money they save. So if they save money by not diagnosing because they did not train their models to look for things that went outside the standard deviation, then what AI is meaning in terms of real policy is that your family member, your mother, your grandmother who needs information because of a gene difference, that information may not be built into the model, and the medical care she needs to have may not be achieved because the AI did not get trained on it because we were told you cannot train AI on DEI if you want to have access to federal contracts. That's policy, that's technology, but that's also humanity. And I
Racist.
use, yeah,
Uh, and also, as we follow the money, the
yes,
platforms and the foundational models that are being most supported by this government are deeply entrenched within the government and their private practice.
exactly.
Well, I mean, that's so sobering, and it's hard to follow up with that, but it does come back to the core mission at RFK Human Rights. And again, we're here to celebrate your book and the book club's book of the month. And our mission at RFK, and I say this as a board member, a very proud one, is really rooted in dignity and human rights and healthcare human rights. Access to universal healthcare should be a basic human right in America, we feel. Um, when you step away from the novel, are you more faithful or fearful of the future that we're creating? This might be a leading question. And how does your work intersect your work within your legal work, law, advocacy, politics, and writing. How does it all intertwine when you think about these books that you put out every 2 years and where it might take society, frankly?
So Avery Keene's first outing dealt with biogenetics, and I wrote it before they'd finished mapping the human genome. But I have a sister who is a molecular systematist, and she gave me some advice, and so I did that one. My second book was about the energy grid and the pressure we put on the energy grid and the implications it has for how we all operate. And this was before data centers started using up extraordinary sums of energy. And that was actually premised on a conversation I had with one of my other sisters. She's a judge. And so I was thinking about the courts and how much we know about how our world operates. And then this one was AI. And my brothers helped me too. I have two brothers as well, and they all serve a purpose in how I think about things. And I say that to say this. First and foremost, I don't pick lanes. I consider my world a freeway.
Mhm.
So I'm going to have to switch lanes as often as possible to get to the destination. And what I want is human dignity. I want human prosperity. I want us to be better people. And that means that I use my legal training, I use my policy training, I use my capacity to write fiction and nonfiction, I use my ability to speak out loud and to engage and to organize. And I've never been successful at separating them out. It becomes hard to describe me, but I see them all as interwoven.
Mhm.
But the other part of it is, and I think this is my call and challenge to the work that you do and that everyone who's listening, we shouldn't feel constrained that we have to be one thing. I love your story because you began in one place, but you've taken what you know and you've helped to weave it into so much more about who we can be. And those who want us to be constrained want us to believe we can only be one thing. So I am fearful that too often we believe the least flattering version of ourselves, that we
Mhm.
believe we have to be constrained to one idea, to one lever, to one thing that we want. But I'm hopeful and faithful that when given the opportunity, we will do more. And we have risen to those challenges time and again. Robert Kennedy was a perfect example of rising to that idea. It's why I'm so proud to be in this community with you all. And what I try to do with Avery and with her friends, Jared and Ling and Noah, what I try to do with my, the characters in the book with Dr. Diaz and with Kate, I want them to fully experience the range of their highest moments and their lowest depths and
Mhm.
make a choice about who they intend to be anyway. I'm not fearful about the future. I am faithful in believing that if we show ourselves and each other what we're capable of, we can get there. But we've got to know there's a journey and we've got to know we have responsibility. But nothing is written. We are not doomed. I mean, we are in the middle of an authoritarian regime. And as you pointed out, it is funded by a perfidy that says that demanding more from our people will enrich those who want it. And so, well, those things are terrible and horrible and deeply demeaning. They're also galvanizing. And so my faith is that we will rise to the occasion. We will use fiction as a roadmap as much as we use fact, but that we will constantly believe that we are entitled to more, and that's how we get good done.
Wow. Well, I'm inspired, and I think that that modeling is needed now more than ever. So thank you for that. And I know that in 10 years ago, you wrote about a president not unlike the president that we have today. And so you've really been seeing around corners through your books for a decade now, and and full stop. I mean, there's a lot to be learned from art, from culture, from fiction, as every major advocacy movement of our lifetimes have shown. And why not? Why not portray an amalgamation of what you'd like to see in the world through these characters? So I'm deeply inspired by that personally. And I've heard you say that Avery is not really based on you, but maybe more of an amalgamation of heroes in your own life. Is that true?
So Avery is who I'd love to be if I could make me up. But here's what I think. So yes, Avery's a lawyer and so am I, but Avery actually cared. she was going to be a lawyer. I played one on TV for a while and then went a different way. We both have good memories. Hers is spectacular. Mine's, okay. But where she is me is a conversation I constantly have with myself, which is, what do you do when you have responsibility but not authority?
Mhm.
And often being in the minority in a community, whether it's minority leader, where they give you the title, but they don't give you any of the power, or just the spaces we find ourselves in where we are outnumbered, outmatched, out-resourced. Avery for me she is an amalgamation of people I admire, but she's also a constant question. Like, what do you do when you don't have enough to win? And where I always want her to begin is she always decides to fight. It's never foisted upon her. I respect stories that do that, but those heroes' journeys where you don't have a choice isn't really, you didn't have a choice. Like, she has to decide. There, I give her outs. I give her moments, whether she wants to take them or not, where she has to make the affirmative decision to engage, the affirmative decision to risk, the affirmative decision to believe. When it is all happenstance, nobody has obligation. But when you make the choice, even if you don't have the power, that's where real opportunity begins. And what I want people who read Avery to leave with is this belief that they too can make a choice, not because they're guaranteed an outcome, but because they're guaranteed access and they're guaranteed the opportunity to try to make change. That's what I like to do. And I like to think that that's who I am too.
I would say so. And it sounds a lot like one of the core values of RFK, which of course is speaking truth to power.
Absolutely.
I know we need to open it up. It's 3:30. We're going to open it up to questions from the community, and there are many. But I have one, which is, first of all, how do you do it? How do you come out with a new book every 2 years? And your portfolio career, and an immense one at that. And also, I know we're here to talk about coded justice, but are there any hints as to where your protagonist might go next?
So I like to joke that usually they either want a book or they want their money back, and the money's gone, so they get a book. I'm very privileged because I've been writing for so many years. I've been writing novels. My first book got published in 2000, so for a quarter of a century now, God, I've been publishing. So I've learned how to shape my stories. I know how to plot what I need. I write pretty quickly. I learned that when I was a kid because I was usually late with my homework, so I had to write fast. But I try to be as structured as possible, but still as imaginative as I can be. And it is, for me, it's something that's important to me. And so I consider my life, I don't believe in work-life balance. I believe in work-life Jenga. So I stack up all the things I need to do and I pull out the pieces and just hope that the whole tower holds. And if it falls apart, I've done enough prep work that I can pretty quickly reassemble it, and I can apologize to my editor if I'm a little late. So with the next story, I am actually thinking very much about, without giving too much away, I want Avery to confront the moment we're in, but 2 years on, where we don't have clear resolution about the kind of nation we're going to be. I believe in democracy. I believe we should fight for our democracy. I believe we're in the midst of an authoritarian takeover, but it is not done. And so I want Avery to confront that. But there's a question I have about, how do we do that outside of the normative belief that it has to come through Congress and the federal government? As someone who got, my start at city government and then became a state legislator, I really think that there's a local, if not solution, then there's a local point of entry for how we save our country. And I want Avery to spend some time thinking about that.
And as Avery would say, living is political.
There you go.
Well, I have many more questions, and I'm very happy to rattle them all off one by one, but I do want to open this up because we invite the community to ask questions in the chat, and I just want to post that there. And, you know, something that you just mentioned really appealed to me, which is work-life Jenga. I used to call it work-life integration. I agree with you. It probably doesn't exist. Work-life balance definitely doesn't. We've thrown out that playbook. But can you help us understand just a little bit what beyond work-life Jenga, as an author who is so compelled by and motivated by change. And do you feel a certain amount of pressure to constantly be modeling this inspiration that you've portrayed through your book and also in real life, constantly be modeling? It sounds in some ways a little bit exhausting to always be the arbiter of truth for all of us. And so just, you're so real. I feel like I can ask you kind of a real question now too. Are there moments where you feel like you want to pass that baton on to other folks who are ready for the challenge? Or do you feel like as an author and a politician and a legal expert, a lawyer, you're always invigorated by the change?
I think it's somewhere in the middle. So I approach it with this idea. I start businesses with partners. I start organizations with partners. I write alone, but my characters become my companions in that work. I don't do things by myself. And I think part of exhaustion happens when you believe that you alone are responsible. I've never believed that. When, I appreciate it when I get to be the first to do something. It's terrible that we're still counting first this late in life. But when I'm the first, my response is, okay, now how do I make certain I'm not the last? I think you can stave off exhaustion or at least mitigate it if you never go by yourself. If you're always thinking about how do I bring more people in, not just to access, but into power and to a sense that they too can do it. That's why I like to write the stories I write, because I want to tell stories about things I wondered about, but I want people to understand it. Like my very first romance novel was on microzeolite technology and environmental justice. Not two things that most people think about with romance, but when you finish the book, you had a little bit more knowledge about it. And so for me, it's it, I'm hesitating because I just realized basically I'm replicating my childhood. I have five brothers and sisters. I never got to do anything alone. I think I was like 15 before I realized Snickers bars had peanuts because you had to share it with everybody.
Oh,
So I come into the world with a belief that you bring others with you, and that helps militate against exhaustion, but it also becomes the reinvigoration because you get new ideas, you get new hopes, you get new dreams, and you get people who see things you can't see, but that you can be a part of because you've helped them get there, and now they can help you get to the next place.
Well, it's highly relatable as someone who once had a roommate who was this only child and she didn't want to share her hair dryer. And I remember saying, there. First question that's come in, and it's about a specific framework that you've spoken about in the past that help you construct your novels. And this framework we understand to be what is the problem, why is it a problem, and how do you solve it? Can you help us understand what that means and whether or not that framework is adoptable?
I use it for everything. So I have to give credit to Ann Allstott, who was my tax professor when I was in law school at Yale. I was her graduate assistant on a book that she was writing on an amazing idea of how we make certain that children coming into this world get access to resources from the very beginning. And when I was helping her, she pulled me aside and she said, "Look, I'm going to give you research, but this is how I think about things. What is the problem? So be able to articulate what you're trying to understand." And then she said, "Why is it a problem?" Too often we skip to the third, which is how do we solve it? And the reason the why is so important is because if you are solving the problem without knowing why it became what it is, then the solution may be fantastic, but it's just not applicable. And the example I use is that you see somebody on the side of the road. I see Soraya, her car is stalled. She's late for a meeting. She's desperate for me to help. And I race past her and I go and get a gas can and I come back and I proudly present her with gas. And she's like, "My tires are flat." I solved a problem, but I didn't solve the problem you had. And if I'd taken the time to understand that why, that would have given me both better understanding of you, better understanding of where we need to go next, and it would have made me take a beat to think about what my options are. And so whether I'm writing a novel, writing nonfiction, coming up with policy, when I'm giving a speech, everything is structured in that way because that's how the human brain most effectively processes information. If you skip the why, though, people may remember something you said, but they won't remember the point of why you said it.
Hmm. Wow. We are our first question, and thank you for that. First question from Magnol Garcia. And the question is, given Avery's own moral compass and her past institutional experience, what tensions did you most want to explore? Woo, this is a very good question. Between the imperatives of law structure, precedent, and the fluidity of technology where the rules are still being written.
I wanted to really escalate and surface that tension. So I appreciate you seeing it. The point is that the law as written is not, it is not the answer. It's not the truth. It is a version of what we think the truth should be. What technology challenges us to realize is that that truth has evolved. And it's one of the reasons as a lawyer, I've always been very hostile to the notion that it's only what we see, because what we knew then precludes the advance of human knowledge. It precludes experience.
Mhm.
The reason we don't have automatons making decisions is we need that context. But I need Avery to sometimes have to grapple with what she knows she's supposed to do, what she thinks she ought to do, and whether it's worth the risk to tug harder on one versus the other. And I love the law as the backdrop for all of this, because the law in its most effective form isn't just what we see as what we can or cannot do. It's how we think about what we should be permitted to do in a society. And when again, I referenced the argument that Avery has with her friends. They are all coming at this moral compass question from very different vantage points. Do you allow someone's past behavior, their criminal record, to inform their healthcare if it could help you save their life or if it could condemn them to never getting service? Like, how do we grapple with those questions? And we make those decisions every day when we decide who gets to have access, what laws, what rules, what things you've done wrong determine your value going forward. And so, yes, I love bringing in that structural question. We need form in our society. The legal question, we need rules. But the fluidity question, we are never the same the next day as we were the day before. And how bound are you and how bound are we to what we know versus what we need?
Wow. Okay. We have a follow-up question to something I asked earlier, which is, were there any, you mentioned going down a rabbit hole of deep research in healthcare and AI, and I love the image of you in that a beautiful mind room with your post-its anywhere. Clearly there are, again, without spoiling any part of the book, there are bits of AI which are unseemly and confusing and provocative in coded justice. But the question here from our community is, was there anything that really inspired you? There's a lot of advancements in AI, and I'll save you from my own personal book, but a lot of advancements in biotech, within foundational models for psychology, some really interesting new advancements. Were there any that inspired you in particular?
Oh, absolutely. When I started researching how AI could accelerate drug discovery, that
Yes.
is a fantastical idea. This notion that we aren't bound by how slowly we promulgate answers. I have a big family and I have siblings who faced health challenges, and knowing that there could be a swifter answer is an extraordinary idea. Pascal, who's one of the Pascal, who's the compounder. Like, when I learned about drug compounding, didn't know that much about it. I'd heard about it once or twice, but ended up going down a rabbit hole and created a whole character who had that capacity. The idea of bespoke medications
Mhm.
as a counterweight to how we're all just sort of hoping that it works for us, that's an amazing thing. And AI can help us discern how we get there faster. I loved that idea. Now, it can go horribly wrong, but the capacity of science to solve problems and to make us better at being who we are is something that I love. That's why I love Star Trek. But it's also something we've got to be very careful about. It's why they've been able to do so many Star Treks, because in the right hands or the wrong hands, we get different answers.
And as a follow-up to that, what does health equity mean to you?
Health equity means, and I want to be really clear, access to healthcare is a human right. It should not be conditioned on your ability to pay or your worthiness to survive. It is a human right. Health equity then says, what do we need to do to ensure not equality of outcome, but equality of access? How do we ensure that the research that is done, the services that are offered, and the follow-up that is given is accorded not based on how we judge you, but based on what we owe you. And what we owe you as human is your ability to survive. That's how I think about health equity.
Well, Representative Abrams, former Representative Abrams, it has been such a joy to interview you today. And I would like to offer the community, because we are live streaming, one last chance for questions before I hand the torch back to Michael. But if you have not yet read Coded Justice and you're joining to just get a glimpse into the book, we can't recommend it highly enough. There we go. And I am so intrigued and so excited to read the next installment of the Avery Keene series. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Soraya. This has been delightful.
Okay, over to Michael. Live streaming.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Soraya, and thank you, Stacey. And it's always great to have one of our laureates return and join us in any of our activities. And you've been so kind and generous with your time. I know I still get comments from our young leaders around the country saying that the time you spent with them was memorable and helped keep them going through the challenging times that they're seeing on the campuses that they're on or in their first jobs post campus. So on behalf of Kerry and the entire organization, thank you very much for joining. And Soraya, thank you for stepping in and moderating a great conversation. And just as a reminder to everyone, if you haven't already found a way to book your space, December 9th, New York Hilton will be joined with a whole host of characters, including Stephen Colbert and Magic Johnson and Martin Cabrera. So there's a whole list. Darren Walker, please do look for the opportunity to join us, and keep an eye out for the upcoming book club schedule. Thank you so much for everyone, and we'll see you at the next event.